Oh, can I get rid of this? Okay. Yeah. Welcome to the first in-person class of microeconomics. Yeah. Let us set up. Today, I'm trying to record at the same time. We'll see how this works. Sorry, I cannot get rid of this thing. Oh, we have another person on the call. Cool. So 2 people at least. All right. So today we see important topic, consumer behavior. So this is again fundamental stuff in economics that's going to be important to you for the rest of your economic life. So let me just briefly tell you what we're seeing here. Yeah, so the introduction is to marginal utility, consumer choice, or just utility in general, what it is. Why do we use this to sort of understand how consumers choose what they choose and consume what they consume? So this is a sort of way for us to structure our understanding of people's decision, and then later on go on and build demand curves. So up to now, we've seen demand curves. We've seen why say when the price increases, then people demand less, or we've seen that this is the case, but now we're trying to understand why this is the case. By the way, the sound is good. At the back, do you understand me? Yeah, all right. Okay, and then maybe if we have time, some discussion of income and substitution effects. These are super interesting in my opinion. If you are a bit confused by them at the first instance, it's all right. We've all been there. That's it's not as straightforward as the rest, but don't worry, it should be fine. All right. So utility, what is this concept? So it's a concept that economists need to understand rationality. Why? Well, because at some point we have to assume that people do what they do for some reason, and many large disciplines have their own way of understanding this. So if you go in psychology or sociology, or they all have their big paradigm that helps them to structure their understanding of human behavior. For us, we have chosen utility, which is something that was introduced by, yeah, you know the philosopher? Somebody? Or maybe it's now it's scary because it's a large class. Yeah. I'm sure most classic philosophers have thought of this, but yeah. No. It's an English philosopher. Jeremy Bentham. Oh, that's quite small. So let's add stuff. Yeah, so I'll try to like follow the usual way of doing things, like adding some stuff if I feel like it, and then I upload the slides with notes. Yeah, and so what Jeremy Bentham says is, I hope I'm writing his name well. Yeah. So his definition is the property of any object whereby it tends to produce benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, happiness. So it's very broad and very large. So and psychologists sometimes say, oh yeah, people avoid suffering, or people seek pleasure, or do they seek satisfaction in their lives as a whole? very complicated, but super interesting topic, and lots of interesting work is done at the limit of, at the frontier of psychology and economics on this topic. And we're uncovering many different quirks of people's thoughts. Like people sometimes don't remember well how they experience something, for instance. So here we're just going to have a very basic understanding. So we're just going to say that utility is a number that somebody has, and that number, and the person is going to by his or her behavior, try to maximize this number as high as possible. And it can be any number. We don't pretend that we can measure it by any means, but what we pretend is that it's some underlying feature that's there that that explains people behavior. And then we can model it. We can create utility functions and then understands people behavior thanks to that. So the two main concepts here we're going to have is, so utility is utility. It is total utility. So it's a consumer's total satisfaction resulting for the consumption of a given product. What explains people's behavior is not necessarily their level of total utility, but their level of marginal utility. And what is marginal utility? It's whatever I can gain in my utility if I consume some other product, or if I choose this decision rather than that decision. And why do we say marginal? So means at the margin. So it means a small increment. Yeah. So I don't know if I told you that, but yeah, economists always think about things in small increment. So we assume that we can consume fractions of cars and fractions of houses, fractions of education. Does it make sense? Absolutely not. But why do we do that? Well, we do that because it makes the math much easier. So in this class, we're going to see most of the reasoning is going to be we're going to reason in chunks of goods. So it's going to have an intuitive feeling to it. But once you go on later in your classes, it's all at the margin. It's all using calculus and derivatives. So, and you're going to be very glad that we use this. All right, so big assumption about human behavior or human consumption is that of diminishing marginal utility. So what we're saying is, so if imagine, for instance, now I've been talking to you for a while and I'm a bit thirsty, so let me have a sip of water. Much better. Now my utility has risen at least 10 points. But then the question is, do I still want to have another sip of water? Well, yes, it would be nice, but not as nice as the first one. So this is what we're claiming for most of the goods that we consume is, when we don't have them, then we really would like to start consuming them. But when you start consuming them, then you get less and less extra utility out of it. And so what are we going to do then? Well, it's since I have a limited budget, I have some money that I can use to buy stuff, then I'm not going to just buy water or just buy housing or just buy transportation. I'm going to seek to have some middle ground in which I have a small amount of each. So this is the whole theory behind consumer behavior. So this is what it looks like if you are then going to graph your utility. So here you have Alison's total and marginal utility from drinking. So now it's not water, it's juice. So we imagine that Alison can drink 10. Yeah, it makes sense. 10 per day doesn't seem right. It seems big, a bit big, but it's possible. And then you see, so how many utils, so the measure of utility is utils, nobody cares, it's just, if you want to have some unit, it's call them utils. And we're going to see that Alison's total utility is 0 here if she consumes 0. Is it true? Well, we don't care about 0. You can add 10,000 to the 0. All that matters is that the utility is increasing with each extra drink that she gets. So the baseline is nobody knows. But then the important thing is, first of all, you see that 1 drink, 2 drink, 3 drinks, the total utility increases. So 0, 30, 50, 65, 75. So this is what we're, the main property is, yeah, you could say that utility is increasing in consumption. But then the important part is the marginal utility here. And what is the marginal utility? It's the extra utility that Alison gains from this extra drink. So from 0 to 1, the utility increases from 0 to 30. So what we're going to say is that the marginal utility at 0 of getting this first drink is 30. Then it's 50 minus 30, so it's 20, then yeah, and all the way down to 99. So and then yeah, they have some trick of kind of showing you visually that it's not decided whether this 30 applies to 0 or 1, so they put it sort of in the middle there, kind of between the two lines. Again, if we use calculus and derivatives, then this all goes away and it becomes much, much simpler. But here you can think of the marginal utility as starting from 0 and getting a marginal utility of 30, or being at 1 and how much utility did I get from my drink? It was 30, for instance, or 0.5, or yeah, it's around this. Yeah, so then you graph this total utility and you get this, and you see that how can you tell that the marginal utility is decreasing? Well, so in this graph, what would be the total, the marginal utility, could you say? Somebody knows a bit of calculus? Yes? Exactly. So the marginal utility is the slope of the total utility. So I could, yeah, draw something there. So yeah, for instance, here this would be the slope. Oops. The slope would be 30, and then here the slope would be less, so it would be like less, and then so the value of the slope is, for instance, 6 or 7 around here, but whoops, here it's bigger. All right, so that's for one drink or one sort of good. But then the question is, what is Alison going to do? Well, Alison has to choose between many, many different sort of goods and have to compute in her head how much extra utility is this or that good going to give me. Well, of course, Alison doesn't have a computer in her head, so she does all of this intuitively. So I intuitively choose to drink the water because I feel that like it's going to give me pleasure. Yeah. So here what we're saying essentially is that we are rational in our maximizing decision, by which we mean that we state that this is what consumers like to do. So they have a utility function and they seek to maximize it, and they are rational doing it. So they can sort of incorporate all the information available to them in terms of prices, in terms of travel costs, if you add travel costs, in terms of uncertainty, if there's an uncertainty around the world. So this is all included in their head, and they compute rationally the best decision that they can make on the market. So the best way to consume. Yeah, so then they allocate expenditures to maximize this. Yeah, so here is an example. So for instance, imagine that Alison has two choices. So she could decide to spend her last dollar on juice or spend her last dollar on burrito. So what is she going to do? Well, that's her last dollar. And let's imagine that she cannot divide it. So really the question is, what's going to give me the better utility between the two? Well, it depends on what's the marginal utility of juice, what's the marginal utility of burrito. If the marginal utility of juice is higher, then it means I'm going to be happier when I'm done drinking the juice. Otherwise, it's the burrito. Yeah, I did have a graph there. All right, so no, I'm not going to go into that. It's too. Okay, so and then what do we get? We get this situation there, or maybe a better way. Yeah, I know a good way to put it for you. So imagine the following. So I can go on and spend my extra dollars on burritos or drinks. What's the extra? What's the marginal utility that an extra dollar gives me if I spend it on burritos? Or let's say that's the good X. So it's the marginal utility of X. But I have to account that X has some price to it. So if, for instance, the good X is twice as expensive as the good Y, then I can consume half of it. So it means that I'm not going to get the marginal utility of 1 unit, but maybe half of 1 unit. So it has to be the case that I divide the marginal utility of X by its price. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Or it would make sense if both had the same price. Then what I would decide is the marginal, just equalize the marginal utility of everything. But yeah, so this is sort of the marginal value I get by spending my extra dollar on X, and it has to be equal to the marginal utility I get from spending on Y, but divided by the value of Y, QY. Oh yeah, so that's what was written there actually. So yeah, so that's the optimizing decision. If I chose between a number of burritos and number of drinks, then I would just compare marginal utility of X and marginal utility of Y. But since I have to buy them, and they might be different price, so this is what I have to take into account. So this is what is going to be done by all the consumers in the world. You may not have realized it up to now, but all your lives, every time you have bought something, this is what you were doing. I'm telling you for sure. And since you were rational, yeah. And one way to reorganize this these formulas is this way. So you just divide by MUY here on both sides and multiply by PX on both sides, and you get this this representation there. So this means that the marginal utility of X in terms of marginal utility of Y has to be equal to the price of X in terms of the price of Y. Yeah. Does that make sense? So now that we're adding math, it's the time to ask your questions if you have any. No? Okay, so we can continue. Okay, so is the consumer maximizing decision realistic? So as I was telling you, we sort of assume that they have a computer in their mind and they're super, super rational. Now, can we test for that? Well, through the 20th century, when all this theory of consumer behavior was developed, we would just assume that this is the case, and we would never think that it would be possible to test it. But now there is a whole branch of economics called behavioral economics, which is a link between psychology and economics that actually tests whether people are rational or not. And we do find many, many instances where people look like they're not being rational. So it's not just the fact that so imagine that something is super expensive and the other is super expensive too, and it's difficult to make the computation in your head with prices. That's understandable because we're not computers, but many, many different quirks that people have. Yeah. So a good example of this is the way that consumer choices can be affected by how the choices are presented to them. So there's a very good psychologist named Dan Ariely who has done a lot of work on that. And so one thing he was asking, for instance, is well, I don't know if he is the first who came up with it, but he did some work on it. So, so he was asking, is the way the order in which we present options on a survey or on a question, a set of questions affect how people are going to answer them? If we think they're rational, then absolutely not. So if you say, oh, do you prefer an apple, an orange, or a banana? Or do you prefer a banana, an apple, or an orange? If we are rational and we think, oh, well, this has to do with how much utility I'm going to get, then the order in which I present the choices shouldn't affect your answer. And yet he finds many instances in which this does happen. So one good example is about organ donation. So he realized that there are some countries in the world in which organ donation is very, very high. So when people die, they agree to give their organs to people who need them, or science, or other reasons. And other countries where it's extremely low. And then you would intuitively think, oh, that's because people have different attitude about the sanctity of the human body and they want to be cremated or buried or something. But no, if you compare the countries, some look like they should be extremely similar in terms of culture. But then if you look more closely, so you realize there is one important difference in the way that people decide whether they will give their organs. It's how they answer to the question and answers when they get their health insurance from the government. In one set of countries, they ask people, so in case you die, would you like for your organs to be donated to somebody? And then in the second set of country, it is, your organs are automatically given to people. Would you like to opt out of this system? So do you have some guess as to who, in what system there's the highest organ donation? You have, I'm not going to judge you, just say, what?
Opt out.
Yes, exactly. So opt out. So it's just because people don't like choosing. So they look at the questions and they're like, oh yeah, answer. And if they don't have to answer, then they're like, yeah, maybe I don't think I'm going to die tomorrow, so I have time to decide this. So let's take our time. And obviously, they never go back to this questionnaire to change their answer. So then they just die and they donate their own organs. They just didn't opt out of it. So and this has yeah. Okay, so this is exactly what nudges are. So what are nudges? why isn't that nudges? So they are small changes in the way information or decision processes are presented to people. Which have huge impact on their decision or have big impact on their decisions. So this, why do we call them nudges in particular? Well, we call them nudges because they are essentially costless to authorities. And this goes totally against what economists would think. So it's something that you would, so if you ask economists, so will that work? They will say no, but it does work in practice. So, well, we have to accept that this is indeed something that we can act on, because normally economists would say there's nothing that people can do unless they are incentivized to do it, unless we pay them to do it, or unless we charge them a fee to if they don't. So because they're rational and because all they care about is, oh, I want maximum money so I can buy as much stuff as I like. But nudges are nice because they don't cost anything and they can bring immense level of improvement in society's welfare. So organ donation is something that is extremely valuable because it saves lives. So yeah, let me make this a bit smaller. Yeah, so there are many ways to make people decide a weird thing that make them totally look irrational. But yeah, most of the time, it's still a good assumption that people are indeed rational. All right, so what happens then if there is a change in product's price? Well, so I'm putting it out there. So what happens if juice becomes more expensive? Oh, yeah, no, sorry, I cannot ask you. It's already written there. So if you were wondering what was the right answer is it's more expensive, so I want less juice. So I think it's kind of obvious. But then how does that work in here? So what happens is, so I need to have that marginal utility of x divided by marginal utility of y equals px divided by py. So then what did I see? I see that that px goes up and py stays the same. So there's what can I do as a consumer to make sure that so this ratio here that goes up, this ratio here needs to go up to restore equality. Because what I want is that those two are equal. So then what do I do in terms of consumption of x? Well, as I have shown previously, I'm going to go back. So I don't care about total utility, I care about marginal utility. And so what I want here is to increase this ratio there, MUX over MUY. So what do I have to do? Well, the marginal utility decreases when I consume more of X. So what should I do if I want to increase this ratio? I should decrease the consumption of X and increase the consumption of Y. So in that way, the marginal utility of X is going to increase, and this ratio is going to go up. And if I consume more of Y, then the marginal utility of Y is going to decrease. So this is what how I'm going to be able to restore this. So yeah, if so, exactly. So if Px goes up, then MUX goes up and MUY goes down. So consume if Px goes up, then Allison consumes less of X, more of Y, and MUX increases and MUY decreases. And this is going to restore the two together. If the price of X goes up, it means that it's more expensive for me to buy of this, so it should be more precious in some ways. So since it's more precious, so if I consume less of it, then yes, it's more precious. It's more costly for me to consume more of this good. Right. Yeah, so this is the same point I was just doing. So hypothesis of diminishing marginal utility tells us that the consumer buys less of a product, then the marginal utility rises. So this leads to the basic prediction of demand. So the rise in price of a product leads to each utility maximizing consumer to reduce the quantity demanded of the product. So this is sort of true. So I would say true most of the time. So price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. It's true most of the time. And we're going to see that it's true for what we call ordinary good. So it makes sense. Most goods are ordinary goods. So most goods have this property. But in some very, very specific, very rare cases, it's possible that the reverse happens and that the price goes up and I actually spend more on the good in question, consume more of it. But it's very rare. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay, so this is how then I have, how do I go from individuals to the market? So here, this is the description of what somebody does. So some individual always reacts this way. So you can imagine that most of the time they will, yes, switch from good X to good Y when the price of X goes up. And then how do you, then the thing is, in general, in the world, then we have many, many people that form markets. So how do we aggregate their behavior? We aggregate them this way. So maybe I've told you that before, we always represent prices on the vertical axis and quantity in the horizontal axis. Yeah, this has been done for a century now. And it's can be sort of confusing because in principle, you would say, yes, I react as a function of the market price. So usually we have that when something is a function of something else, then what's a function of something else should be in the vertical axis. So here it's revert. Because it's useful in many cases, it's useful to have them this way. So don't get confused. The price is always this way. But then what you have to understand is if the price is here and the quantity is here, and what I'm doing is aggregating behavior at the market level? Well, I'm adding up quantities together. I'm saying, say, if, for instance, the price is 9, then how much units is going to be consumed in the market? Well, here, imagine I have two market of just two consumers, so Arun and Bashira. So the price is 9. Arun consumes 0. Bashira consumes 0. So the total demand in the market is 0. If the price is 6, Arun consumes 0. Bashira consumes 1.5. So the aggregate demand, total consumption on the market, if the market price is 6, will be 1.5. And then if I go down to 3, then what is going to be a total consumption? It's 2 for Arun plus 4 for Bashira, so 6 in total. Yeah, and here it's okay. We don't go into too much detail about this, but note, where's my okay. So note that here there's a sort of kink in the function, because it's 0, 0, 0, and then it starts increasing. So if you add this curve to that curve, you should see a sort of kink at 6. Here they don't represent it, but for advanced students who know how to add up curves together, and who were like, oh yeah, but how come I add one curve with a kink and the other with no kink, and I get a curve with no kink? It's just, yeah, there should be one, okay? But for all the others, don't worry, you don't have to care about that. So it's going to matter for other classes, yeah. But so here, just keep in mind that we add quantities on the horizontal axis. That's what you have to keep in mind. What time is it? Okay. Okay, income and substitution effects. So change in price has two distinct effects, and this is where we're going to be discussing more in detail the ordinary goods and other non-ordinary goods, because there are two things that are going on when the price change. So when the price change, there's the fact that the relative price change, and there's the fact that there's a change in consumers' real income. Why is that the case? Well, imagine I consume two things. So as Alison, I consume burritos and juice. So I already consume, say, per day, I consume 5 bottles of juice. Now, if the price of juice goes down, well, it means that now, so imagine that the price of juice was $1 per bottle, and it goes down. So I was spending $5 on my juice per day, and now it goes down to $2.5. So I get an extra $2.5. So if I don't change anything about my consumption, I still have this sort of extra income. It's not extra nominal income, but it's income that I can spend. So because what I care about is my purchasing power. So I have these extra dollars that I can spend either on juice, either on burritos. So this is what we're going to call the income effect, the fact that the real income goes up. And then there is the second thing that's going on, which comes from this thing that we've been discussing, is that if the price, say this is juice, so if the price of juice increases, then the relative price between juice and burritos change. So I must be sure that at the end of my decisions, the ratio of the marginal utilities reflect this change. So in all actuality, what this means is, if the price of juice goes up, then yeah, I know it's more expensive to buy juice, so I want to buy more of to buy probably less of it. So if the price of juice goes up, do I buy more juice or less juice? Somebody has an opinion, what matters more? So I just said that if I have more juice, I have more disposable income, but juice is more expensive, so I should consume less of it. Less?
Doesn't it depend on the marginal utility? So like if you already have as much juice as you want, then why would you buy more even if your income goes up or down?
Yeah, so it depends on all these things. But yeah, so most of the time we see that when the price change, when the price of juice increases, I'm going to spend less on juice. But there is a risk for some sort of goods that are called giffen goods, where it's the opposite may happen. And it's actually been found in yeah, I'm going to see that. Yeah, so for ordinary good. If price goes, see the price goes down, of price of say juice goes down, then two things. One, more disposable income, and two, so income effect. And two, yeah, juice is relatively cheaper, so consume more. And is relatively cheaper, so that's the substitution effect. So consume more as well. So for these two reasons, usually, yeah. But the thing is, for some type of goods, the income effect is actually not positive. So, yeah, so okay, I'm going to write so 10 to, but that's not always the case. Yes. All right. Yeah, maybe I should just go to the next slide. It's going to be easier for you. Okay, substitution effect. If is the change in quantity of a product demanded resulting from a change in its relative price, or holding real income constant. So it increases the quantity demanded of a product whose price has fallen. So it reduces the quantity demanded of that product that when the price has risen. Yeah, so here we care about marginal utility of one versus the other. So yeah, second one is income effect. So oh, I'm locked out anyways. Okay, so income effect is the change in quantity of a product demanded resulting from a change in real income. So holding relative prices constant. And what we're able to do when we analyze these behavior is to differentiate between the two effects. So it leads the consumers to buy more of a product whose price has fallen, provided that the product is a normal good. So yeah, so this is another, so normal good is when you have more income, you consume more. don't confuse this with ordinary good, which is when the price falls, you consume more. So normal good is has to do with income, and ordinary has to do with price. Yeah, so the price of the income effect depends on the amount of income spent on the product, whose price has changed. Yeah, so but we already introduced the normal good before, so when we were talking about income elasticity. Okay, slope of the demand curve. So obviously the size of both effects is going to change the slope of the demand curve. So for some goods, the demand curve is going to be very steep, whereas for some other goods, the demand is going to be relatively flat. So it's going to be a play between the two of them. What matters is how much a good is important in somebody's day-to-day consumption. And what matters too is the size of the income effect, because the substitution effect is always negative, by which I mean, if the price increases, I always want to consume less. But the income effect can have two signs. It can be either positive or either negative. So so just to see if you remember some things. So for ramen noodles, do you think the income effect is going to be positive or negative if the price falls? Negative. Yes. So if the price of something falls, like ramen noodles, then I have more income, more disposable income. So it essentially means that I'm richer. So if I'm richer, do I want to consume more or less ramen noodles? I want to consume less ramen noodles. But if it's something like diamonds, so if the price of diamonds falls, then I have more disposable. Well, of course, I always, every week I consume at least 10 diamonds. I go to the jewelry store and I buy 10 diamonds. So since the price of diamonds fall, then in my weekly consumption, I'm happy because I have more money. And then what I do? I buy even more diamonds. So yes, I'm going to come with a diamond encrusted water bottle soon. You're going to see. All right. And yes, the very strange good, which are, yes, so this is the opposite of ordinary good. So it's products with a positively sloped demand curve. So when the product is more expensive, then people consume more of it. Does it make sense? It looks very, very strange. So here's what's going on in a few words. So these are extremely, extremely inferior goods. So goods that take a very large portion of the total household expenditure. Let me give you the example of my ex-colleague. So he had old Ford Fiesta car that was from the 1990s, from the time he was still a student, I think. And so he was very happy with his car, but then the car started, but yeah, it was also still, he thought, okay, let's change the car. But then the car started breaking down. So he's like, I don't have the money right now, but yeah, very soon. But now I really have to repair it. So he goes to the mechanics, and then it's $1,000. And then it breaks down again, and it's $3,000. So you have to spend more on it. And then the more he spends on it, then the less. Essentially his car is more expensive for him, and he has less money to buy something else. So he's stuck with still repairing his old car. So yeah, that's a very, very bad situation. And so for up to very recently, giffen goods were more of a theoretical thing that may happen, but some researchers did observe giffen goods. So I'm going just to tell you yeah, so given goods in the world. So rice in low-income communities in Asia. So can be a given good. So has been shown to be a given good. Why? So people can choose. So people choose between rice. This is inferior food, and meat, the superior food or the luxury food. And then what they did was manipulate the price of rice. And what they observed is when the price of rice rose, then people had so few money left, so little, that they needed to they couldn't afford meat anymore. And bought more rice. So that's a very sad situation to be in, but yeah, it can happen. But you can imagine that this is very exceptional. Most of the goods are not like this. For most of the time, when the good is more expensive, you consume less of it. All right. But yeah, it can happen. So I don't know if there's there's no thing is it showing all these behavior is very easy if I show you not demand curve, but utility curves on the graph and the budget curves. But yeah, so we're not there yet in this class. So I'll just leave it at that. But know that all these behavior, they can be derived by looking at consumers' choice sets and utility function, and we can really see what goes on when there's a given good. All right, so but this is, so here we're having the usual demand curves. So there's the quantity on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. And here they show what can happen to what can happen if there's a change in price for 3 types of goods. So yeah, here are 2. So these 2 goods are what you see is so those 2 are ordinary. Why? Because the demand curve is negative. So when the price goes down, people consume more. Here, though, I have a normal good, because when the price goes down, I have more disposable income. So it means that the income effect in red there is positive. So I will consume more, consume more. And the substitution effect, you see that the substitution effect has to do with marginal, relative marginal utility. So this is always positive no matter what. So it's always the case that if I compare 2 goods and one is relatively more expensive than the other, I'm going to consume less of it than the other. But so you see that most of the time the income effect is perhaps positive but small. So these are most of the goods that we encounter normally. But for inferior goods, inferior goods, then the income effect goes in the opposite direction. But you see that the substitution effect compensates for the income effect. So it means that, but you see that the resulting demand curve is much steeper. So this results essentially is in a less elastic demand curve. And then for very extreme cases in which the good takes a big part of the people's consumption and are very inferior, well, then you can observe an income effect that's actually larger than the substitution effect. Yeah, so question about this. So this is a bit, yes?
Do goods like Bateman described in theory of the leisure class behave like normal goods?
Do goods like what?
Like Bateman described in theory of the leisure class?
Oh, I haven't read this book. So what
But basically said that people buy more diamonds because they are expensive.
Oh, yeah, this has nothing to do with it. Yeah. Yeah, so it's an excellent question. So this is purely a matter of, so here people care about one thing is what this gives to the, what the consumption gives to themselves. So they just drink water because they drink water and because they like it, but it's not because they think that it's going to make them look flashy to other people. And yet you can observe this thing, that the fact that yeah, the price goes up and people consume less. So this is an extremely inferior good. So in your case, so I'm going to repeat the question is, so yeah, in case of goods that you want to buy because they are more expensive. So this has, yeah, maybe I don't know if I've given this example before, but yeah, in some American colleges, at some point they had too much money, so they said, oh well, let's lower tuition because then it's good to have as many students as possible to register. And lo and behold, fewer students registered. Why? Because they said, oh well, if it's cheap, it means that it's no good value for me. I'm somebody who's going to be a master of my society later on, so I need the most expensive education. Yeah, so this is completely different. Yeah, but good question. This has purely to do with rational utility maximization subject to a budget constraint, and you can find this thing. Yeah. Right. Oh yes, so but here we are. So conspicuous consumption goods. So this is exactly what you were proposing there. So goods consumed because they have some snub appeal. So yeah, this it would violate the rationality essentially, because you would think no, if it's more expensive I consume less, but it doesn't, because there are so many other things that are going on. And especially if my goal is to flash to other people, so I buy a nice car, but yeah, maybe in our generation, I would say I buy expensive NFT and I use this as my Twitter handle, so then people know that I'm a big roller and I am full of money. Yeah, so this is it's rational in this sense, because I rationally expect people to think that I'm rich, and it's part of my utility. Oh, by the way, so that's a good point though to note is, so utility is a functional concept in the sense that we use it to categorize or to organize our thoughts about people's attitude toward certain choices that they have to do. But nothing prevents us from putting anything that we want in the utility function. So if I just had a child, then probably the happiness or the welfare or the fact that my child has enough food is definitely part of my own utility function. I can tell you that. So it's not just consumption. Here we're just discussing consumption because that's what we care about when we want to describe how market works. But yeah, so yeah, one point to note. A note. Utility can be affected by anything. So if we believe that having let me put this here. Social prestige makes people happy. Then this is part of their utility. And conspicuous consumption is a perfectly rational choice. All right, so do not come out of this class thinking that economists assume that all people care about is materialistic goods. People care about anything. If I'm a researcher and I'm interested in conspicuous consumption, I'm just going to have a model where conspicuous consumption is part of the utility function. So, or not maybe not conspicuous consumption, but it would be social prestige, and the way to get it would be to spend tons of money on goods that make me look rich. Yeah, there was a question. Yeah.
I just want to understand the bottom few sentences. So basically, there's like kind of an equilibrium effect where say there's like a fashion brand. So it's like if more lower class people buy it, then that's offset by like higher class people reducing their consumption because there's less prestige associated. Is that essentially the translation, or is that different?
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is my preference from certain good isn't just something that's ex ante decided, but it's going to also be the result of everybody else's decisions, right?
It's like the reason some goods are expensive is to keep out like undesirable people. So, but it's like then you make a decision. So it's like you make the product and brand will match the market, and then that's offset by the fact that we lower the price, and then like higher class people don't buy it because of prestige. I guess that's not correct.
Yeah. So it's a more a question that's relevant for like marketing and market decisions. So yeah, I don't know. I think you're right, but so one thing that a bit tangent to that's really important too. So another important note that I forgot to say, but yeah, it reminded me of that. Yeah, let's have this smaller. Economists assume that preferences are predetermined. Then decisions are made taking into account preferences. So preferences market prices. And budget. Yeah, then I would say consumption decisions, of course. And so in your example, it would sort of violate this for the following reason. It's so if I observe that less wealthy people start buying things, then it changes my preference for that thing, for instance, and then I'm going to change my behavior. So is that likely to happen? Of course, all the time, because we all observe our fellow humans, and if somebody has something that looks trendy and expensive, then I want it. And if something looks, if I'm a hipster and I like, and I see that something becomes too popular, then oh, it's bad. I shouldn't buy it anymore. But so yeah, for us, we start with assuming that preferences are preordained or preset. Otherwise, we cannot say anything. And of course, that's in real life, we know it's not the case because of advertising. So the whole goal of advertising is changing people's preferences for stuff. So they're convincing them that they should buy it. So we know it's not the case, but if we allow people to have their preferences changed all the time, then we cannot say anything. So because then you would say, oh, the price went up, but I didn't consume less because I had less money. I consumed less because I thought it was not a good thing anymore, or the characteristics had changed. Well, at some point you have to categorize what's changing. It's the whole ceteris paribus assumption. So you change one thing and you leave the other unchanged. Yeah, so this is just the so conspicuous. Or what sometimes you say Veblen goods are totally distinct from given goods. So given goods are something that you have even if you just with the virtue of having a budget. Yeah, that's it. You can have them. Consumer surplus. All right. So this is something I've discussed last class, but here we can see it more in firsthand. So the concept of surplus. So before, what we were discussing is just value. So what we would say is if I spend that much money on something, then this is the value I get from it. And then what is the surplus? Well, it's whatever I was ready to spend minus what I did have to spend. And here you can see that. So here, what is the market price? Okay, it's $1 per liter. All right. So so the price is $1 per liter. So you spend $6 for the first liter of milk. So what is, and you were ready to spend $6, but you only spent $1. So then the surplus is $5. Then the second is the surplus is $2, $1. And you spend as long as the surplus of spending some extra money is positive. And then once you get a surplus of 0 or lower, then so you would be essentially indifferent between buying 5 or 6, because if you buy 6th one, then the price of buying it is $1 and the value it gives you is $1. So and if you have some more realistic setup, you would even say, well, if I have to say go to the store and buy it, then my value is actually negative from getting it. All right, so that's quite easy, I would say. Yeah, so here's what the surplus looks like. So so this is for one individual consumer, but of course it would be the same for if you add all consumers surplus together. So it's the difference between the market price and the maximum price that the consumer is willing to pay for that unit. And so this is something that I think for people in, say, in Canada or the US or Europe, we may not be too familiar with it because we're not used to bargaining a lot. But if you go to there's a large number of countries where people bargain a lot, and then you really get what's going on there. So they would say that something like, yeah, I've lived in say Mexico for a year, and then they would, the first thing they look at you is, oh, that's some person who has a value of 10. So I can maybe say, let's start the bargaining at 15. And then, okay, that's some person who looks poor. So let's start the bargaining at lower or higher. And then they know what they are able to extract from you. Here, everybody goes to the same store and they have the same price, which is the same for everybody. So we have this notion that, yeah, something is worth $1, so the value is $1 and that's it. Well, no, the value is much higher for people who buy it. That's why they do buy it, because they have a winning outcome from this. And the value for the store of keeping this milk, then it's much lower. So this is why why people go to the store and why markets do exist. So this, I think, it's nothing too complicated. Yeah. So consumer surplus is the difference between the total value that consumer place on all units consumed of the product and the actual amount that they do pay. So the total value is what they were willing to spend at most for a good. So for instance, if we for 6, what was the total value? It was 6 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1.6 plus 1.2 plus 1. And what was the total money spent? It was $1, $1. And so the surplus is the difference between the total amount and the total value actually spent. Yeah, so that's not a difficult concept. So yeah, so if you want to compute it very easily, so it's the area below the demand curve. So here it's sort of the demand for one person, but you would have the same for a market, and above the market price. Yes. So my laptop is starting to fail, but anyways, the class is almost over. Yeah. So how many slides do I still have? A bunch, but we have the yeah. Okay, this, I think it's a neat place to stop here, because this is more complicated. So this is much more. This is everything that I've been talking to you about yeah, consumers behavior with budget constraints and utility curve. So we're going to see all of this next class. All right, so have a great day, everybody. And I'm going to be at my office if you need to see me for office hours.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.